So I am delighted to be joined by, well, one of my um, favorite people in hardware. Um, you've created one of the breakout products in terms of uh, keyboards, particularly ergonomic keyboards, over the last, I would say, 6, 7 years or so. There have been very
So,
few that have made quite the impact that your product has. Would you like to introduce yourself?
sure. Hi, I'm Jesse Vincent. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Keyboardio. My wife Kaya is the co-founder and CEO. She kind of runs the business side of things, and I get to do the tech side. But yeah, this very much started off as a hobby, making a single keyboard for myself, and it got wildly out of control in the best possible way.
So you used to be in software before, right?
I something like a 20-year career doing software stuff. I my first major product was a tool called Request Tracker. It's an open source issue tracking system, customer service, help desk, ops, that kind of thing. Um, I spent a few years as the project lead for the Perl 5 programming language. It was all my fault for the 5.12 and 5.14 releases. Um, I created what has become the leading open source email client for Android called K9 Mail, which was again a hobby project that got wildly out of control. Um, it was designed for an audience of one, and when I looked up, it had a couple million daily actives, um, which was kind of a thing. But yeah, no, I have a long career in software, a lot of it in Perl, some of it in Java, some of it in all kinds of random stuff. The keyboard came out of a period when a startup that I'd been working on with a friend cratered, and I swore I was going to take a year off to mess around and find probably the next enterprise software product that I was going to work on. And at some point, I discovered there were folks on the internet who were building their own keyboards. So, in the best Perl hacker tradition, I figured, how hard could it be? Figured I'd spend a month, I'd knock together a keyboard, and I'd be done. That was 2012, and it's now 9 years later, and we've shipped thousands and thousands of keyboards to something like a third of the countries on Earth, um, and it just keeps going.
Um, After such an illustrious career in software, what made you take the plunge into hardware design and manufacture?
Well, so I have in fact always had bad wrists. I was that guy at conferences who would walk around with a Microsoft Natural keyboard and a laptop, and I would try things like sawing the number pad off. I'd been through pretty much every ergonomic keyboard out there. Um, I have a data hand, I have a touch stream, I have a one of my favorite non Keyboardio keyboards out there is the IBM M15 split ergonomic buckling spring keyboard.
Oh my
Um,
goodness,
I
that
actually
is
have
a rarity.
I have one right out of frame. We have so it is a brilliant design with
Yeah.
some fatal flaws. Um, and as far as I can tell, they only ever made several thousand of them because nobody wanted them. And so I have two, and I will never part with them. Um, I like the keyboards we make better, but they are wonderful keyboards. But so I really stumbled into this. The original intent had been to make myself a keyboard, and after I started posting pictures of my prototypes on the internet, people started asking that fateful question, when can I buy it? And so Kaya and I sort of talked about it and decided that we would probably try to do a Kickstarter. This was 2013, early 2014. Um, and this was going to be a laser cut plywood keyboard with an actual Arduino micro stuck right in the middle of it, with the dumbest possible circuit board. And I had put up a couple of blog posts about how I had made my first couple of keyboards. The theme of the blog posts was every single mistake that I have made while designing keyboards. Um, And for whatever reason, each one of those posts ended up spending a day at the top of Hacker News. On a lark, I had added a sign up for my mailing list at the bottom of the first of these posts, and within a couple of weeks, we had 1,000 people on our mailing list, and we sent out mail to this mailing list saying, "We're going to do a Kickstarter. We have 2 prototypes. These are laser cut plywood prototypes. Who would like to test one of our prototypes? Tell us why you should be one of our beta testers." Within 24 hours, I think we had over 100 responses. People wrote prose. People wrote poetry. People wrote some slightly creepy fanfic. At least one intrepid beta tester wrote and composed a song to the theme of Friends, shot on multiple locations. He got one of the keyboards, but that was the point where we realized that there might actually be something there. Few months later, we ended up applying to a hardware incubator called Highway 1, which was run by a company called PCH, and got accepted. We were the only group in that class of the incubator that was explicitly uninterested in the hockey stick sort of profit curve that startups generally want. We were very clear with them that we wanted to make good quality keyboards, and yes, we wanted to earn a profit, but we were not trying to, become the next Decacorn. And from there, Kickstarter in summer of 2015, we did something a little bit crazy. We decided to do a coast-to-coast roadshow across America, stopping at about 30 hacker spaces in 30 days to do meetups to let people put their hands on the keyboard. Because a keyboard is, of course, a very personal thing.
Sure.
How do you know if you're going to like it without being able to touch it? And so we had a coast-to-coast roadshow and met hundreds and hundreds of people and actually got to make some design improvements based on watching people typing on our prototypes. So we kind of stumbled into it, is I think the short answer to your question.
So, hardware is really, really hard. I'm a software guy myself. I don't think I could ever do hardware. Now, although your software career is actually in its own right pretty legendary, did you have any idea hardware would turn out to be as hard as it was?
So it's not so much hard as slow.
Right.
It's like the cycle times on software dev, it's minutes from making a change to knowing if your change worked. And more painfully, when you ship a product and there's a problem, it is minutes to build and roll a patch release and to ship it to all of your customers.
Yeah.
With hardware, it's a little bit harder. It is a little bit slower. It is a lot more painful when you discover something you would like to change after things ship. I definitely have some stage fright about shipping product because I want to make sure that it's good. We had no idea what we were getting into. If we'd had any idea what we were getting into, we would have had the good sense to run screaming. And I'm really happy that I had no idea, because it means that we just did this thing. And we've learned about supply. We have a supply chain. We have I have folks I can lean on for electrical engineering help and mechanical engineering help. I have an on the ground PM in China. I have a CNC mill in the garage. I have a reasonable but not amazing soldering setup here. I've learned circuit board design. I've learned little bits of mechanical design. And I am by no means an electrical engineer. I am not a mechanical engineer. But I've learned enough to be able to work with professionals and to fake it when I need to. But the software side of hardware is a lot of fun. When you can go from what your line of code is to watching an electrical signal turn on or turn off, it's like full stack programming. When you get down to the electrons moving across the copper, it's kind of neat. Early on, we had this bug where sometimes key presses weren't getting detected, and I had to go down to the data sheets, and it turned out that we needed to insert a no-op, a delay, into our key scanner code because we were checking to see if the electrical signal was going through the line before the electrons got there. And so we actually had to slow it down because the code was faster than the electrons.
So you mentioned the CNC mill.
Yeah.
I understand that in the early days, you'd made an aluminium prototype.
We did. We did not make that one ourselves. That one was made in Ireland by a contractor we were working with. It is very heavy. It is beautiful. It also is very, very cold on a cold day.
Is that something you would have figured out until you'd made it?
I should have figured it out because I used to live in New England and I had a MacBook.
Right.
And on a winter day, you open up that MacBook after it's been outside for a while, your hands are real cold. It looked beautiful. It was going to be pretty expensive to manufacture, and it was going to be insanely expensive to ship.
Mm.
Like, it probably weighed 3 or 4 kilos.
Yeah, there are some keyboards coming out that are not too far off that. Like, for example, the Model F.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's not really a reissue. It's made by another company.
Yeah, no, Joe. I actually talked to Joe when he was just getting started about some of our learnings about manufacturing.
Right.
No, and I have one. It is an astonishing reproduction. I'm really, I understand why it took them so long to get to a shipping product.
So back to the Model 100. That is going to be the successor to the wonderful Model 1, which of course I have right here. I think I committed to the Kickstarter because I realized not necessarily that the keyboard was the kind of thing I wanted to type on, but because the arguments, not just one argument, but the arguments that you made so much sense. I mean, moving all of the shifters underneath the thumbs, having a columnar layout as opposed to a staggered layout. I just thought, well, other people have thought about this, but in not nearly so much detail. What made you go to such lengths to get the best possible, in your view, layout for a keyboard, knowing that it would create, I guess, some resistance in people?
Yeah.
People are fairly committed to their old school QWERTY layout, right?
Oh, yeah. So there are a few things that went into it. One of them was just that if we're going to do this, we may as well do it. I spent a lot of time reading keyboard research. Some of the papers that had the most influence on me were from the Tron project in Japan in the 80s, where they basically reinvented computing from the ground up. It was a holistic view of a computing infrastructure from pocket computing to grid computing. And they touched everything. And when they got to keyboards, as far as I can tell what happened is that they looked at what we had done in the West, giggled politely, and then designed a keyboard around how hands work. Mm. Because, I mean, your standard keyboard is designed around what was easy to manufacture as a typewriter at the turn of the previous century. It's not good. Mm. And so when I started messing around with keyboard layouts, it was, okay, what can I reach? What's comfortable to type on? I had previously typed on a Kinesis, and it never really gelled for me. The Microsoft Natural Elite, that, the $20, $25 white monstrosity that had electronics that melted in the rain, was actually not a bad keyboard to type on. Mm. It got some of the angle stuff right. It was still a traditional staggered keyboard. But I started playing around, and as I started designing and testing, the research from Japan made more and more sense. And I had seen some people had played with putting some buttons elsewhere. Like there were some folks on the forums who had put an arcade button that you hit with the heel of your hand.
Yeah.
And that didn't really resonate with me, but I realized that there is actually a place right under your thumb that is quite easy to just drop as you're typing.
Yeah.
And that was how we ended up with the palm buttons that became the function key, that second shift. And then we had a meeting with a notable keyboard researcher who his lab has done work for some of the largest companies in the world and their ergonomic keyboards. And one of the things he told us is, you're probably only going to get one shot at this. It is entirely likely that, your product will fail. You should just take one of the things that has already been done and make a small improvement to try to improve the general state of the art. And, you shouldn't, then maybe you'll get a chance at a second keyboard. Of course, our takeaway from that is, well, if we're only going to get one shot, we're going to make the damn thing we want to make.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
no compromises as far as you're concerned.
Plenty of compromises in any design.
Sure.
There are all kinds of things that, one of the things we had played with for the Model 1 is, rather than having an entirely flat plane on the wood, and so I'll pull out a Model 100 just to be able to gesture at it. Instead of being able to have an entirely flat plane here, we'd actually had a contoured top. And what we discovered is the contoured top, for the right size hand, felt amazing. For any other size hand, it was horrible. And so the other thing is that by adding a tiny bit of contour here, it changes the thickness of the board you've got to use to do your CNC milling. And so it basically doubled the cost of the wood. But the real thing was that it made it feel not right for many, many people. And so in order to get something that works pretty well for 80 to 90% of hands, if you were designing a keyboard that worked for only one person, you would change everything. You would measure for exactly for you.
Right.
A lot of stuff does sort of even out when you have, across the vast majority of hands. When you're typing and you've curved your hand to be able to type, that takes away a lot of the difference in finger length between all sorts of people. It's there are all kinds of things I would do differently now, but a lot of that is because we've learned a lot, and so a lot of this stuff is going into the Model 100.
Sure.
It's the electronics are more robust in a bunch of ways. We're switching primarily to walnut, not just because we think it looks better, but because it mills really well, holds its shape well, but unfortunately it also gets shipped over to China from the US. Which is where our maple also comes from the States.
Right.
We're looking at a massively more powerful microcontroller. We haven't committed to it yet because we're still waiting on the vendor to promise us the pricing. But we'd be going from this little AVR that has 32K of flash and 2.5K of RAM to potentially a Cortex M4 with as much as 96K of RAM and a meg of flash. Which is a lot more space to work with. Right. I'll probably spend a lot less time trying to shave 3 bytes off of something.
So, ergonomics aside,
yeah,
pure ergonomics aside, one of the things that really captured my attention in the original Kickstarter campaign was your mention of the term heirloom grade.
Yes.
And that you liked the idea of this item that you use every single day. There's a coldness to the existing work. And given that you're touching it every single day, and that it is literally your instrument to communicate to the computer, why not take some inspiration from musical instrument design? And so I'm really interested in what drove you to go for that kind of wooden design and wooden finish and the beautiful curves and so on.
Yeah. So the original inspiration for wood is it was a happy accident. we had been doing most of our prototypes out of polycarbonate, so basically Perspex. And I had had a large order from McMaster Carr, who's a material supplier in the U.S., that was due to arrive, and I had a slot at the local storefront laser cutting shop to make some prototypes, and there was a blizzard, and so the shipment was delayed. And so, because it was a little bit would be a little bit frustrating to have to reschedule this appointment with these very in demand lasers. I ran down to a local lumber yard and I purchased some plywood, and we threw it in the laser and cut it, brought it home and sanded it a little and stained it, and it looked good and it felt good. It hid the imperfections better than the acrylic did. It was lighter, it was cheaper, and it looked more premium. Now, milled hardwood is more premium. That it is more expensive to. It's a very different set of technologies from laser cut plywood. But I was sort of sold on just how nice wood felt after that, and then it sort of did become obvious when you start looking at guitars and other musical instruments that we were not the first people to figure this out.
Given the unique design and given the amount of interest that you garnered around the original Kickstarter, and indeed before you even committed to the Kickstarter, what kind of user stories have pleased you the most?
The ones that please me the most are the ones that I also feel the most uncomfortable talking about in public, because they're the folks who say things like, "This saved my career." I have horrible repetitive strain injury and the Model 1 made it go away. Because we are very careful not to make medical claims, because among other things, that's just lawsuit bait. And without any kind of peer-reviewed study, it's snake oil. Everybody's hands are different.
Yeah.
We did talk to ergonomicists, as we were doing the design of the Model 1 to make sure that we weren't doing anything really dumb. Like the thumb arc on our keyboards, it's an arc, and you move your thumb left and right. And that was a thing where we wanted to make sure that we weren't asking people to do something that was going to be damaging to them. And the advice that we got from the ergonomics professionals was that that's fine. The problem would be if you were having them do that.
Yeah.
If they were moving their thumb down. And so that, very happy to not do that sort of thing. And it's not a design we would ever do, though some other folks do.
That movement is what I have to do to exercise around my de Quervain syndrome, for example. So I'm very glad you avoided that. Sorry, do go on.
And so, the stories that make us feel the best are the ones from customers and typists who say, this is the only keyboard that I can type on. I feel great and horrible about that, because it means that I am now a bottleneck for them to be able to type at all. But it means that we've built something that is actually meaningful to people. There are a lot of keyboards out there. It is relatively hard to make your mark in keyboards. A lot of people make 60% keyboards or 80% keyboards or, full-size 104 key keyboards. And you change up the colors, you change up the materials, you change up the shape of the enclosure, but at their core, they're all very, very similar. Those do also sell much better, and so we will eventually do that as well. But it matters a lot to us that we're making something that is genuinely useful to people.
Yeah, I mean, I was not necessarily going to bring up this story, but one of the things that really surprised and pleased me was I went through a period where I was having repeated procedures on my hands for trigger finger. And I wrote to you, and you're a small company, you've got plenty to do, and explained my situation. You were kind enough to send me a complete map and a reprogrammed operating system, I think it was. It was quite a few years ago. that
I
allowed me to
remember.
use just one half of the keyboard, and
Yeah,
it worked. I mean,
that's great.
used the
Yeah.
uh, the the palm shifter to mirror the keyboard, and after about, I think it was a couple of days of practice, I mean, I was never going to be as fast as I was normally, but I was actually able to get some work done.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
that
Yeah.
yeah, that level of configurability and programmability is a point that you've made repeatedly, not just in the original Kickstarter, but in the current Kickstarter too, right? Why is
Yeah.
the open nature of what you've made so important to you?
I grew up with what these days is called open source. In my experience, open products help people be able to do whatever it is they want to do better. Uh, William Gibson has this phrase: "The street finds its own uses," and the technology version of that is that you know a piece of technology is successful when people are using it for something that you never imagined it would be used for. And that's, we don't know what people want out of their keyboards. We've got a pretty good idea, and we know a lot of the things that people find useful, but I can't tell you today what we're going to need to bake in, what someone is going to want their keyboard layout to look like 6 months from now.
Mm.
Your use case, when you wrote to us, it was a thing that had actually been in the back of my head as a possibility. I had known that we could do it. I'd never actually gotten around to doing it, but it was pretty clear that it was going to be helpful for somebody someday. It was actually based on some research that was done by Edgar Matthias, who is the designer of the key switches we use in the Model 1. It was called Half QWERTY, and it was I don't remember if it was his dissertation, but it was something he had done while he was a researcher, and then he had actually made commercial keyboards that had it baked into the firmware. The patent is now expired. He has blessed anybody who wants to do something just like that. But it was a thing where we could throw it into a firmware for you. I think it took me 15 or 20 minutes, maybe. Like it was like, and it's a thing that now exists, and it helped you type.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I managed to get work done over a period. It was important that I somehow got work done, even though some might argue that it was crazy for me to persist. Um,
Yeah.
but reality takes over, right? I mean,
Yeah.
your doctor might well say, "Listen, you shouldn't be working." And there are a lot of people in that situation whose hands are their only way to make a living, right?
Yeah.
And I know you don't want to make claims like that, but anything that allows people who are even slightly disadvantaged a bit more comfort, or those who plan to be around for a very long time, more comfort, that's got to be a good thing. So Model 1, huge success. What was it, 650K plus on Kickstarter it raised?
Yeah.
What made you move to, now I've got to ask you the pronunciation, the Atreus or the Atreus? I've always called it the Atreus. I could
So
be
I
wrong.
had called it the Atreus, but Phil calls it the Atreus, and so Phil designed it, so he's the one who gets to name it. Yep.
So what made you go, so this is effectively a partnership, right?
This is a partnership, and so what had happened with this one is we actually had another keyboard that we were in the process of getting ready to make with our old factory when things with our first factory fell apart. If you want to hear I'm happy to talk about it some. But we've written thousands and thousands of words about everything that happened. But
I
Phil
read many of them. It was quite epic.
it was quite a thing.
Yeah.
There was one moment where I was literally hiding in a stairwell with a video camera running to make sure that somebody didn't try to sneak out the back of a building during a meeting. Oh yeah.
Part two.
Um, Never again. Um, so Phil Phil Technomancy, who designed the original Atreus, approached me asking for a design review of his upcoming update to the keyboard. And after looking at it for a little while, I said, "Well, look, I'm not a professional electrical engineer, but I can do this, and I can make you a new circuit board that will be more robust, less expensive, and easier to manufacture. And I'm happy to just do that because I like what you did. I had I had built a prototype based on his earliest designs and had it on a shelf. And I did that. And then we started talking a little more. I said, would you maybe be interested in having us partner with you, and we can manufacture it as a product rather than a kit, and we can sell it and we can give you a royalty. He said, you don't have to give me a royalty, it's GPL'd. I said, yeah, we know, but we'd rather do that. We'd rather, you be able to continue to do your next thing. And so that we ended up running in that direction. We've built and shipped thousands of Atreus's at this point. We've got plenty more in the warehouse. Yeah, but it was not the keyboard. It was not the next keyboard we'd ever intended to make. But it was
Right.
convenient. It was convenient. It's a really straightforward keyboard, without LEDs, because we were trying to make it relatively inexpensive to manufacture and ship. It is a full travel, full height keyboard, but it's one plastic tray, one metal plate, a circuit board, keys and keycaps. And yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that intrigued me about this was with the Model 1, there was no space bar, which I know for some people seemed like absolute heresy. But as a touch typist, I got used to that very quickly and didn't bother me at all. In fact, when I look at my iPad keyboard, I can't even remember what it's called. It's a horrifically expensive one. I think they actually charge more for that keyboard than you do for the Model 1, and will be doing for certainly more than the Model 100, which seems a travesty. But anyway, when I look at the space bar on that, it's the same area that has shine on it. And it's about the width of a space key, right? So it's a very compact layout, actually, although you've got this beautiful butterfly design. And you would imagine that it's got many more keys than it does. It's actually, what, 64 keys?
64 keys.
And then you went to this, which is what, 44 keys, I think?
44 keys.
What do you think was... What kind of customer do you think you were going after with this change? Do you think you were going to reach people who already had the Model 1? I mean, you certainly got me instantly because I saw the appeal of it, but...
Yeah. So it definitely appeals to a segment of the Model 1's customer base. It also appeals to a slightly broader segment of the keyboard enthusiast space because it uses standard keycaps, it has standard key spacing. It is a layout that is sort of known and trusted. The Atreus and the Plank are the two 40% keyboards that everybody knows and uses. It is a very minimalist keyboard. It is absolutely an acquired taste. It is not for everybody. I miss the palm keys from my Model 1 and my Model 100 on the Atreus. As you might imagine, we were thinking about how we get something that is ultra tiny but still has palm keys. We're not there yet. People have suggested we have flip-out arms. Not quite willing. I don't think I'm willing to. Any mechanical part like that is just asking for a disaster. But it is. There's an appeal there.
So, I mean, you mentioned the Plank. The keyboard scene, the mech keyboard scene, has absolutely exploded over the last few years. You've now got YouTubers building mech keyboards. They're very conservative, don't get me wrong. They're getting the same old Kyle and Cherry switches, mostly Kyle these days, it seems, or the odd Gateron from time to time, custom keycaps, but they're all QWERTY. And not all of these people who build these mech keyboards touch type. It's almost like some kind of meditative practice. Why do you think that's happened? Why do you think there's such a huge customization appeal? People willing to spend up to twice the price of a Model 1 on a completely standard keyboard, albeit with interesting materials.
I mean, I've seen well more than twice. talked to folks at meetups who, college students who explain how they've put $1,200 or $1,400 of materials into what is otherwise a pretty normal keyboard. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing that makes any keyboard appealing. It is a thing you are touching every single day. It is an expression of who you are and what you do, but it is also the tool you're using to interact with the world. And so if it's bringing you joy, it's like, why not spend the money on, the artisan keycaps that, that make you happy? Why not, if a giant brass weight in the bottom of your keyboard feels nice underneath, it makes your typing experience better. Great, run with it. I'm a little sad that it took us so long to ship our first keyboard, because in between when we started and when we started shipping, the scene did absolutely explode, and I wish we could have been there sooner. We've got a whole bunch more things we want to do.
Hopefully you still can. I mean, I think that brings us neatly to the Model 100, which of course I backed as soon as I humanly could. I was actually in a car at the time it launched, and if there was any way I could not have been in that car to sign up at 3 p.m. my time dead on, I would have been. I've explained the story to you in private, but very excited, not just about the walnut enclosure. I mean, walnut, who doesn't love walnut, right?
Yeah.
But you made a whole bunch of other changes. Would you like to talk about some of the feedback that led to some of the changes that you made in the Model 100?
Sure. I mean, one of the biggest changes that anybody's going to notice is that instead of using the Matthias Alps drive switches, we're now using hot swappable Cherry MX compatible switches, primarily Kaiwa's switches. That's sort of the number one thing that you'll notice, because it means you have a whole bunch more switch options. It means that you can use a very simple tool like a switch puller to pop switches in and out. So it's just, let me see if I can, just a simple little tool. You go boop, and switch comes out. You can put a new switch in, and
Is that your stretch goal puller, by the way, for the
that is, so this is a commercially available Keyboardio branded puller.
Right.
We like them enough that I suspect that this will also be the stretch goal puller.
Cool.
But you can buy this and a Keyboardio branded keycap puller from our store for $5.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Why didn't I see that? Yeah. So I mean, so many of the pullers that come with some of these mechanical keyboards are so cheap as to be barely usable.
Right. I mean, and it's like, they're not actually expensive. This is not expensive to manufacture.
Right.
We sell this and a custom branded keycap puller for $5 and we're actually earning a profit on that.
Right.
We're big on selling things at a profit so we can continue to operate.
Yeah.
With my software friends, I understand that this is a very novel business model. Sell stuff for money, more than it costs to make. But part of it is that we have a supply chain in China. We have somebody who can help us do the sourcing, and so I was able to show him pictures of things that I know worked, and let him go and poke around and find 3 or 4 suppliers who each sent samples, and of those, one of them seemed a little bit better. The difference was that the quality of the metal in this is just a little bit higher than the quality of the metal in some of the others, so it doesn't bend quite as easily. This is technically an IC puller. It's designed for pulling old school chips out of sockets, but it works just great for key switches as well. Other things that we've changed in the Model 100. Because we've changed the switches, we had a chance to update the keycaps. And so this is one of the bits of customer feedback we got, is that the dots right in the middle of each of the homing dots on the F and the thumb key and the pinky key, they were just a little bit too sharp. And so instead of using a ball shape in the middle of the key, we've moved to a sort of more modern standard bar shape a little bit lower down on the key. What else is we've reinforced all the plastics so that the base plates are just a little bit more structural, a little bit more sturdy. We went and changed the USB port at the back, so to give you a little bit more room, so that if your USB-C cable has a really thick shroud on it, it'll fit a little bit more easily.
Right.
It's tiny little things like that. We updated the octopus stands to now have an arrow showing you where the highest point is, to make it a little bit easier to adjust them.
So one of the things I didn't even realize about the keyboard was that you have mounts to be able to put them on traditional photography tripods and that kind of thing.
Ah, yes, that was... So this was originally intended as an escape hatch for if the feet that we'd built into the bottom of the Model 1 didn't do what you needed, you'd be able to mount it on anything that takes an ISO standard quarter 20 tripod mount.
Right.
As it turned out, the feet that the factory designed for the keyboard made a tip over the keyboard. You put the keyboard on the table. Yes, you could adjust it so it was tented, tilted, tented and tilted, tented and reverse tilted. And if you put your hands on the keyboard, it just flipped over. Yeah. So that was kind of a no-go. And so that's how we ended up with the octopus stand design. That actually uses that tripod mount to attach to the bottom of the keyboard.
Right. So what are you hoping to achieve with the Model 100?
We made a good keyboard with the Model 1. The Model 100 fixes most of the things that we would want to fix with the Model 1. It is going to be easier to maintain. It is going to be easier to update. It is hopefully going to be sturdier and more reliable. If we're lucky, it's going to have this much fancier microcontroller, which will let us write better software for it. And it will be back in production, because the Model 1 has been out of production since things fell apart with that first factory. And so it's really, we had an opportunity to revise the Model 1 because we were going to have to make a bunch of new tooling. And it would be foolish to just make the same thing again when we could make something better.
So where can people go for the Kickstarter, and how long does it run to?
So the Kickstarter runs until July 30th. And if you go to keyboard.io, the top link should take you right to the Kickstarter. I'm verifying that just to make sure that I'm not sending people in the wrong direction. Yes, if you go to keyboard.io, the top link will send you over to the Kickstarter. Yeah.
Lovely. All the very best. You're one of the very few companies from which I plan on buying everything you ever release. Not just for altruistic reasons, but because, well, there is no altruism, let's face it. It's all self-interest, because everything serves my needs in a way that I really didn't expect. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing much more of your work.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.